What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. This time for the single game showdown slate on Monday Night Football. It's week 11. Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, single game $1 million winner. In this video, we will talk about the injuries that impact the slate, and there are quite a few for tonight. We will analyze low risk lineup construction tips and core plays. And we'll talk about strategies, ideas, and picks for the biggest prizes in the biggest GPPs that DraftKings and FanDuel have to offer for tonight. So let's start with the injuries, and we'll start with the visiting Houston Texans. The biggest news, obviously, is the return of wide receiver Nico Collins. Was activated last week. They chose to hold him out one more week, and it just seems like teams are being a little more cautious with injuries this year, which is great news for re-injury rates. Again, I have no data to back this up, but that's what it feels like to me. So holding him out an extra week should ensure that he is 100% good to go tonight. So play Nico Collins as you normally would. This means now that the three wide receiver sets for Houston will be Nico Collins. It'll be Tank Dell on the opposite side. And based on usage and alignment, it seems like Xavier Hutchinson has been Nico Collins' direct backup, and instead has been John Mechie, who's been playing the slot as the number 3 wide receiver. He especially took over that role last week, running way more routes than Robert Woods. So expect John Mechie to be the number 3 receiver tonight for Houston. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, Houston does have some injuries. And in a game where they're visiting and more than a touchdown favorite, that is significant for the prospects of their defense and for us having any hope that Dallas competes in this game. First, they have 2 defensive linemen out, one of which is Will Anderson, their best defensive lineman, Pro Bowler last year, second-year guy, top 5 pick in the draft. Will Anderson, he's out tonight. So 2 defensive linemen out. That's good for Dallas passing pass protection as well as their run game. And they could also be without Kwame Lassiter, their number 2 corner, their rookie. He's in the concussion protocol. And Aaron Wilson, who's really in the know with Houston and the Texans behind the scenes, says that he thinks they'll hold him out one more week just because they've been cautious with concussions so far. So down a corner could be good for Dallas as well. Again, we're grasping at straws, trying to find reasons to play Dallas players tonight. And the defensive injuries on Houston's side certainly helps. Now, on Dallas's side, Dak Prescott remains out. Cooper Rush will draw the start at quarterback for the Cowboys tonight. Who else we got here? Their slot corner, Jordan Lewis, is out, so that does help John Mechie a little bit. And Mechie should be pretty low owned tonight, so getting a backup slot corner against John Mechie, we like that as well. A sneaky injury on the offensive side of the ball is Hunter Lepke, their fullback, running back, passing down back, move tight end, does it all for them. And this is 10 to 20 snaps that is going to be missing from mostly the passing game in the backfield, but also some tight end snaps. So this should mean more snaps theoretically for Rico Dowdle, perhaps Ezekiel Elliott, perhaps Deuce Vaughn, but then even more sneakily, their backup tight ends, their number 2 and number 3 tight ends, and Luke Schoonmaker and Brevin Spann-Ford. So we can bump those guys up a little bit, and I think the field will mostly overlook that. So that certainly helps on Dallas's side. And obviously the biggest question mark is CeeDee Lamb. Doesn't have the injury designation on DraftKings, but he is listed as questionable. Did something to his back in Saturday's practice. Head coach Mike McCarthy does not seem concerned. However, you add this up with the busted up shoulder from 2 weeks ago late in that game, the back injury now, backup quarterback. Hard to see Lamb having a successful game here, or at least a ceiling game. However, his ownership reflects that. So we get the ceiling, in theory, of CeeDee Lamb at relatively low ownership on tonight's slate, but for good reason. So it's a matter of risk-reward in the contest that you are playing. So let's talk about low-risk contests now, 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads. Just have to beat half the field to double your money. And typically, we like to play both quarterbacks, both running backs, lock up all the scoring. And we can do that tonight, especially on DraftKings. Let's look. And if we play Joe Mixon, who will be one of the, if not the most popular player on the slate, projects as the best option, and we play CJ Stroud, and we play Cooper Rush, and we play Rico Dowdle, who, by the way, has just had a workhorse role the last couple of weeks. Mike McCarthy said he is our guy now. We're not going to, split reps with Zeke or try the Dalvin experiment anymore. It's Rico's backfield, and so we can treat him as a workhorse running back as a result. That leaves us with 33.50 left per player. We could go with a couple ways. I like Kevontae Turpin, who generally has design touches. Did not have any touches last week, unfortunately, but we know he's going to play 8+ snaps, if not more. and generally gets a touch or two. I mean, and we got him. You look at his game log, scoring positive fantasy points in all but 2 games so far this year. That's more than enough than what we can ask for a $1,200 player in a low risk lineup. So he seems like a pretty good option. And then if you play Kevontae Turpin, 5,500 per player, you could play Brandon Aubrey, Kyrie Fairbairn, Dalton Schultz, Jalen Tolbert, whoever it may be. So that's an option. However, there is some uncertainty and there's some volatility with Cooper Rush. He came out of the game late last week. The game was out of hand. That could happen again this week. Or poor performance could lead to a benching. Not saying that's going to happen, but it could. And he's not the safest low risk option as a result. And in fact, the field is likely going to play Nico Collins over him in low risk lineups. This leaves us with Kevontae Turpin plus a 3K player. And this is a little more difficult to fit in. You could fit in Agumbawale, Ezekiel Elliott, Jalen Brooks. It's possible. You could take him out and play 2K players, Brooks and Stover. You could switch out Mixon out of the captain spot. But this is honestly the core four that projections and the field say. And if you think about the volatility of Cooper Rush and potentially not playing 4 quarters, again, it's more than likely, but there is enough uncertainty there, a few percentage points, that this is probably the route to go on DraftKings for tonight. Now on FanDuel, the pricing is a little different, and we can actually fit these guys in. Let's go over to FanDuel, and that search, a little foreshadowing there. But Mixon, CJ Stroud, Cooper Rush, Rico Dowdle. Normally, we have like 3K, 4K left when we fit in both quarterbacks, both running backs. We have 7K left tonight. So we can fit in John Mechie, Jalen Brooks, Stover. More likely, Mechie or Brooks, the number 3 receivers for their respective teams. That's a pretty good low-risk lineup tonight. So I would roll with this on FanDuel for tonight for your 50-50s, your double-ups, and your head-to-heads. Still no water break sponsor. No one's reached back out. No one thinks it's serious. We're dead serious. If we get a water break sponsor, we will insert it into the show. So hydration is key. We got the water sip. Now let's transition and let's talk about high-risk contests. Leagues, GPPs, satellites. This is why a lot of you tune in to try to win the biggest prizes on both sites. Let's go back to DraftKings. And let's talk about some high-level ideas here. And unfortunately, there are no underperforming wide receivers for tonight. It was a pretty banner day yesterday for underperforming wide receivers. Guys like Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, Puka Nacua, and even Kayshon Boutte, who was pretty popular and didn't score a touchdown, still did enough at his price tag to get you there, even in tournaments. So unfortunately, no underperforming wide receivers. They're really hitting their stride this portion of the season, so we will keep an eye out for them for future showdown slates. So make sure you keep an eye out at OccupyFantasy.com for those, especially on the main slates. What else we got for tonight? So no underperforming wide receivers. How the field is going to build, they're going to be Houston heavy on FanDuel, meaning 4-1 lineups with Houston Houston MVPs, 3-2 lineups, so 3 Texans plus 2 Cowboys in a lineup. Surprisingly, it'll be more balanced on DraftKings, more 3-3 lineups, or a relatively even mix of Dallas heavy and Houston heavy. And you may ask why that may be. And it has mostly to do with the values primarily being on the Dallas side. Guys like Jalen Tolbert, who's going to be popular in the mid-range. Guys like Jalen Brooks. Guys like Turpin we talked about. Who else? Jake Ferguson, who's not a value, but Ezekiel Elliott. Most of the values are on the Dallas side, which will cause the field to build a little more balanced or not necessarily be locked in to Houston-heavy builds. So FanDuel, we can take advantage of that, how the field's going to build. It takes a lot of confidence and perhaps false confidence to build more even or Dallas-heavy lineups over there, but no edge as far as how the field will build tonight on DraftKings. One price I have to point out, it's extremely laugh out loud worthy. It is the Houston Texans defense at $6,200. Normally we have this wall, right? The 6K wall. Guys below 6K, backup quarterbacks, guys above 6K. Defense is like 99.9% of the time below that 6K wall. They're 6,200 tonight. And they'll probably be somewhat popular as a result, even at captain. I mean, I'm never playing a $6,200 defense. I'm certainly not playing them when they're missing 2 to 3 defensive players. I get it. Against a backup quarterback, $6,200 is a lot to spend. Again, we're looking for low-owned defenses to play. We're not looking for high-owned defenses to play, especially at this price tag. And Dallas, $3,600. Any defense that has Micah Parsons, I'm willing to play them at 5% ownership or whatever Dallas is going to be tonight. Now, on FanDuel, Houston is relatively closer in price. Houston is 9,500 and Dallas is 8,500. And if we go to our Occupy model, I'll just show you the ownership really quickly. I have this sorted by FanDuel. Let's sort by FanDuel salary. You guys can see this, right? Okay. Houston D, On FanDuel, 27%. Dallas just 6%. So Houston definitely a better play on FanDuel because of the pricing. And Dallas, we have them at 6% and 4% on both sides. Still like them a lot. Probably prefer them on DraftKings though with the cheaper price tag and the 6 roster spots. All right. The other low-owned play is Brandon Aubrey, $5,200. $5,200. We automatically know that kickers over 5K get a bump down in projected ownership and how the field actually plays them. So that's one thing to think about. 2, he's on a 7.5-point underdog. That's another reason his projection will be lower. But here's a guy, I mean, we know what Brandon Aubrey can do. I mean, look at these game logs: 21-17, 11, 11, 11, 10, 12, 6, 9. And even last week with a backup quarterback still scored 7 points. He has 10-plus point potential, if not a floor, in most games. And he's going to be lower owned than Fairbairn, and he's going to be low owned in general. Aubrey's probably the best GPP play on the slate. It's not even close. So Brandon Aubrey in all contest types, small field or large field alike. So Brandon Aubrey, got to love his projected ownership. Right now, we have him at, let's go up to the model. Now, he's going to be 18% plus on FanDuel. Maybe he gets over that 20% mark. We have him at 13% on DraftKings right now. That is just incredibly juicy. I mean, we're always looking for reasons to play kickers on showdown slates, especially in 2024. This doesn't get any better with Brandon Aubrey. All right. One thing. All right, you saw the foreshadowing in the FanDuel search earlier. One outside the box thinking we have to talk about. It's called the Tyrod Taylor theory. It's called the Marcus Mariota theory. And if you've been playing showdown for a while, you'll know what that means. Or if you've been an occupied member for a while, it could just be the Moose theory. Moose talks about this as being a potentially profitable strategy. It's a backup quarterback. And there's some data to suggest that if you played a backup quarterback in your FanDuel lineup, every single showdown slate, 100% of the time, you would be profitable at the end of the year because they do come in eventually in showdown slates. And the slates that they're in, they're 1% owned, you would hit. Should you do that? That depends on your bankroll. However, tonight, Trey Lance is 6K. He's the normal backup price tag on DraftKings. He is 8K on FanDuel, which is pretty obnoxious for a backup quarterback. Normally they're 5K. However, we saw him come in the game last week. He's not some random backup quarterback. He's a highly touted, at least was drafted highly, back with San Francisco. He played a lot in preseason, and perhaps most importantly, he runs a lot. 100-yard rushing game in the preseason, ran for 16 yards last week. Even if he comes in at halftime, which, again, this is very unlikely. The most likely outcome is he scores 0 points, Cooper Rush plays the entire game. However, in the event that Trey Lance comes into the game, even in the fourth quarter, it would take a lot in the fourth quarter, but if he comes in the game any earlier than the fourth quarter at 1% ownership, you can play pretty chalky around him, and you have a pretty low-owned, high-upside play. Again, this is very, very high risk, large field only, and the most likely outcome is a 0. So I'm going to tell you that again. The most likely outcome is 0 points for Trey Lance. But if he can put up 10-plus points at 8K here or 10K or 6K on DraftKings at 1% ownership, you have an extremely likely chance of winning a lot of money. Now, if it turns out he plays earlier or just crushes, that's how you end up with the Marcus Mariota slate. That's how you end up with a Tyrod Taylor slate. And for those who aren't familiar, that's where their quarterbacks got injured immediately in those games, the Raiders and the Jets, respectively. These guys came in. They put up tons of points, like 20-plus points at 0.4% ownership, 0.1% ownership. And the top of the leaderboard was like 10 people who had these guys. And you do not have to be perfect when they're a top 6 scorer because no one has them. So lots of uniqueness upside in high-risk contests with it. And again, it's not something we can fully recommend unless you're playing maybe 20-plus lineups, but definitely 150 lineups, no less than 20 lineups. Or if you have high-risk tolerance or you don't care and you're like, I want to try this out, go for it. But understand there's a ton of risk, but the reward is pretty up there if you play Trey Lance at 6K or 8K on FanDuel at 1% ownership. Maybe it gets over 1% with this video, and maybe some other people will talk about it, but it is something to keep in mind for tonight because we did see him last week. It's not like there's been no discussion about it. He came in the game last week, late in the game. Granted, it was a blowout. Who's to say this game isn't a blowout and they take Cooper Rush out even earlier? All right, let's talk about captains and MVPs really quickly before we get out of here. Joe Mixon will be the most popular captain and MVP on both sides. He may approach record ownership for a running back at FanDuel at MVP. I'm talking like prime CMC numbers here. We have him at 40% MVP right now, which is probably fair in this garbage game. 16.5, 40%. He easily projects as the best player. Not close in terms of raw projections. However, our model thinks there is some leverage to be had here. On FanDuel, if we sort by FanDuel OF Index, he's actually the number 3 guy. He's not the number 1 guy. And instead, we have 10% Nico Collins above him at MVP, 26% CJ Stroud above him. So the model likes the passing game for Houston a little bit better. On DraftKings, Mixon's down at number 6. So even more leverage to fade over on DraftKings with the receivers and CJ Stroud above him. So I think there is probably, we've seen this before, right? When we have a really popular captain or MVP on both sides. And the strategy generally is either lock that player into all your lineups, rotate different combinations through, hope that he's the optimal captain or MVP, and you have as many combinations as possible to be in the optimal lineup. Or you fade him completely and you play an even or somewhat even distribution of a handful of captains behind him. So if you fade Mixon and you play CD, Nico, Stroud, Dell, maybe you throw in a couple more if you're playing 150. FanDuel, you play just Stroud and Nico Collins, or you play just CD, you play just Dallas MVPs. Different ways to do it, so it's up to your risk tolerance. I would think at that ownership and what our model is telling us, I would fade Mixon and go the other route. However, if you're playing small field GPPs, you don't have to take this big of a stance. You can play some Mixon, you can play some Nico, you can play some Stroud. It's really for the largest contest where you're looking to take a stand. And if you're right, you have as many combinations to be right as possible. So that'll do it for this video. Appreciate you watching as always. Let's give a subscribe if you're not already subscribed. That'll get you notified whenever we post these videos or go live. As we approach Thanksgiving, more and more short slates and Saturday slates and weird slates, which means more videos. So subscribing is the best way to get notified when they're loaded, when we go live, anything like that. So subscribing is mutually beneficial. Helps us out, obviously helps you out as well. Give us a thumbs up. Let's get to 200 likes today if we can. Any questions or comments? In fact, if you're a Dallas fan, comment below. I want to hear your take on the Trey Lance situation. Maybe they're talking about it on talk radio, or you've read something or heard something. Would love to hear what Dallas fans think the likelihood of Trey Lance getting into tonight's game is. So drop a comment if you're a Dallas fan and you have an opinion on that, or if you just have any questions in general about tonight's slate, and I will happily answer them before it starts at 8:15 tonight. So OccupyFantasy.com has all your extra tools, daily plug, lineup builder, and the Occupy model with projected ownership. All that's up and running by the time you watch this video. And so if you want that extra edge, go check that out. So Brian for Occupy, thank you, and good luck in tonight's Texans and Cowboys showdown slate.